historical perspective. It requires a lot of layers that make it very difficult to put in a 30-second TV ad. And I think that's what Republicans are banking on heading into 2026.
And Stephen, I was almost breathless reading the list of issues where the president is exercising authority and pushing the boundaries of that authority, really far beyond what conservatives would typically espouse. One of the things that I wanted to point out is invoking Ronald Reagan. I'm old enough to remember Ronald Reagan. He joked that the 9 most terrifying words in the English language were, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." We all remember, well, those of us old enough remember.
I'm with you.
Thank you. And from President Trump, there seems to be a twist that I'm from the government and I'm here to take it over. He really wants to insert his authority in both government structure, in the culture, in institutions beyond the federal government. How is that being judged by his voters and by conservatives in the future of the conservative movement?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting ride. If you go back to the beginning of his second term, you see that his base, conservatives, Republicans, and his base, they basically support what he's doing. They're not worried, to Joel's point. They're not as worried about the rules. They're not as worried about, the process and why he's doing these things. Does he have the power to do this? Does the Constitution grant him the power to do this? They're worried about results. And Donald Trump says, we haven't had any homicides in Washington, D.C. And they say, I think in part because they believe things about Washington, D.C. that aren't true to a certain extent. They say, wow, that's real progress. I don't care how he gets it done. He's getting it done. And after years of listening to politicians who don't get it done and make promises that they don't deliver on, this guy's at least delivering.
And Kelly, to that point, if we can build off what Steve is saying, it's also not necessarily an argument that's being made to the residents of the District of Columbia, right? Because they're not going to decide the balance of power in the 2026 midterms. You're making an argument about crime and punishment in Washington, D.C. to suburban voters in places like Kansas City, Missouri, and suburban Northern Virginia.
Where none of these troops
are ever going to be. And it's only the perception of what people have of these big cities. It's a much easier argument to make.
I should just say, he creates this reality. I mean, if you look at the things he's saying, if you listen to what Stephen Miller said yesterday, standing next to the president in the Oval Office, he's creating a fictional version of Washington, D.C. for those of us who live there. There's crime. Crime is worse than it has been for a while, and I think Democrats should have done a lot more of it. But the description that Stephen Miller gave, and sometimes Donald Trump...
They use the word hellscape.
It's just nonsense. It's not the way that things are in Washington.
And do you get a sense that this one-man approach that the president projects, is that uniquely Trump, or does this fundamentally change how Republicans view government, which used to be less government, less intrusion, less, it's really turned it on its head.
I mean, when can Republicans make a limited government argument and be taken seriously again? Honestly, I mean, they're midwifing what we're seeing, and it's a problem, and it should be a problem.
You referenced Stephen Miller. Joel, let me ask you about a little clip of what he is the deputy chief of staff. He may have outsized power in this administration. Stephen Miller. He spoke on Fox last night. Let's take a look.
The Democrat Party is not a political party. It is a domestic extremist organization. But I would say to the mayor of all these Democrat cities, like Chicago, what you are doing to your own citizens is evil. Subjecting your own citizens to this constant bloodbath and then rejoicing in it is evil. And you should praise God every single day that President Trump is in the White House.
So do you get a sense that that argument is one that is persuasive to the kinds of voters who will be decisive?
Yeah, sure. The caffeinated ones, maybe. What's interesting about this is, and I get it. I get what Donald Trump is trying to do here, and I understand the political theory behind it. It actually flies in the face of logic of who he is. I mean, let's not forget his first act as president was to give clemency to 1,600 violent criminals not too far from this studio in Washington, D.C. So it's hard for me and it's hard for millions of Americans to take him seriously on tackling crime in a good faith, honest way when this is a president who the first thing he did was deprioritize holding violent offenders accountable.
And Leanne, do you get a sense that this is an argument that is fueled by events or motivated by events? For example, they see an incident of crime and then they kind of build policy around it or build a response around it. Or do you think they are just going through that list of things that they're trying to accomplish?
I think it's a combination of both things. The president ran on crime. He ran on immigration. And that's what's happening. What he's trying to a scene that he's trying to create in Washington, D.C. Not only on one hand, he's talking about crime and arresting criminals. On the other hand, they're talking about all the immigration arrests that they are also doing. And so, yes, his staffer, his Doge staffer, was one of the people who was carjacked, and that was what they are using as an excuse to do this. But as you know, the Washington Post has reported, they've been planning for weeks to go into Chicago as well. And so these are things that the president wants to keep front and center in front of voters, make it look like he is accomplishing something, regardless of what the real facts are about those accomplishments, and champion them.
And Ryan, do you see this, some of the members that you cover when they're here in town, some are holding town hall meetings or are certainly in their districts getting some feedback. Is this something that people are bringing to them, or is this something that lawmakers are talking about initiating the conversation?
So I did see some feed today. Mark Elford, who's a Republican congressman from Missouri, was asked about this in a town hall, and he did express a degree of skepticism about using the National Guard for this purpose and this kind of slow creep of the militarization of police. But having covered Congress for almost the entire run of the Donald Trump era of politics, I can tell you that if you're looking for congressional Republicans to be the stopgap against Donald Trump, you are looking in the wrong place. When push comes to shove, they may feign a degree of concern. They may put out a press release or answer a question in a town hall that provides a degree of skepticism. But when push comes to shove, if Donald Trump says he needs backup from his congressional Republican supporters, he will get it, and he will get it overwhelmingly. The question is, how will congressional Republicans be willing to carry his water when this comes to extend some of these security agreements? That may be more of a difficult task and could require Democrats.
They will have to be accountable for that to voters in 2026, not Donald Trump.
Yes, the limitations on his use of that. And of course, today he said he's the president. He has the power. Expect more of this. Thank you, panel. Appreciate you being here. Lively conversation. Ryan, Leanne, Joel, and Stephen, thank you all. And up next, we're turning to what's happening in the Middle East. Famine and fighting take hold in Gaza as Israel faces mounting global criticism for a military operation that mistakenly hit journalists and rescue workers. A humanitarian aid worker joins me next on the challenges ahead. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
Listen to full episodes of Meet the Press wherever you get your podcasts.
More Americans turn to NBC News than any other news organization.
Hey, I'm Hallie. We are coming on the air with fast-moving developments. Egg prices spiking, as anybody who has been to the grocery store has seen. What does this mean for people? Cheap AI. Talk to me like I'm me, and you know me. How big of a deal is this?
NBC News Daily. Weekdays from 12 to 4 on NBC News Now.
Welcome back. Across Israel, protesters are taking part in what they're calling a day of disruption, demanding the release of hostages and an end to the war in Gaza. Earlier today, protesters there shut down roads, including a major highway in Tel Aviv during rush hour. On Monday, strikes on one of the main hospitals in the Gaza Strip killed at least 20 people, including 5 journalists working with Reuters, the Associated Press, and Al Jazeera. Since the war began 2 years ago, the Israeli government has banned international journalists from entering Gaza, which means that news organizations are relying entirely on reporting from Palestinian journalists who are inside the confines there. NBC's Molly Hunter has more on these strikes, and what we want you to know is this video may be hard to watch.
So hours after those attacks yesterday morning, the Israeli military came out with a very short statement saying they were investigating. Late last night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the whole event a tragic mishap. Again, these were 2 strikes yesterday morning, just after 10 a.m. On Nasser Hospital. It's the South's only functioning and main hospital. It's also a place where journalists often went to work, not only because it was assumed to be fairly safe because it is a hospital, but also because it had Wi-Fi. It was a place where journalists could upload photos and videos, get their reporting out to the rest of the world. Well, we have just this afternoon received a very long statement posted on X, sent out by the Israeli military, about their initial inquiry. They are saying that the reason for that strike on Nasser Hospital is that Hamas had a camera posted on the roof of Nasser Hospital that was monitoring Israeli troops in the area. Now, in this long statement, they did not include a picture or any additional evidence of this camera. They also went on to say that of the 20 people killed, we know that 5 were journalists. We know from the WHO that 4 were medical workers. They say that 6 were terrorists. Now, at the end of this statement, they also say that they have further examination to do, including a further examination of the authorization process prior to the strike, including the ammunition approved for the strike and the timing of the authorization, and secondly, an examination of the decision-making process in the field. Now, we are going out to our sources trying to figure out who these 6 men are that they have named. But what this statement doesn't do, what this initial inquiry doesn't do, is explain why there were 2 strikes. And one of the things, when the AP and Reuters wrote a very strongly worded letter to the Israeli authorities demanding answers after 2 of their journalists were killed yesterday, demanding answers about why there was another strike. There was the first strike, and if that strike was a mistake, it was then 7 minutes later that there was a second strike once journalists had gathered, once medics had gathered on the exact same place. I'll send it back to you.
And our thanks to Molly Hunter for that report. Joining me now is UNICEF spokesperson Joe English. And one of the big questions we have is the military for Israel is continuing its offensive on Gaza City, where around half of Gaza's population lives. And what have you heard from people on the ground about the status of the humanitarian need there right now?
Yeah, it goes to be with Kelly. It is absolutely staggering. You know, when we speak to parents, to children, they are terrified. You know, Gaza City was where we had this famine classification just a few days ago. You know, and whilst this has been a long time coming and we have warned repeatedly, it's important to say that this was not inevitable. A famine was not inevitable. It is down to the choices that have been made over the past few months. And we see the pictures, you know, and the level of destruction and damage is almost unbelievable. You know, I've worked in conflicts and I've worked in natural disasters, in earthquakes, and, you know, this level of damage and destruction to people's lives is almost beyond what you can imagine. So what are parents thinking? You know, it's just another day. They've been through weeks, months, almost 2 years of this. You know, they have so little energy left. But what are they doing every day? They're just trying to keep their kids safe, same as any of us would.
And Joe, you use the word famine, and while that might seem like a general description, it actually is a very specific designation, and a UN panel formally made that declaration. Can you tell us what does that specifically mean, and in terms of the context here, and what do you think some of the long-term consequences can be if famine, that designation, continues to spread?
Yeah, you know, famine is not a term that we use lightly, and this was a panel of independent experts who came to this conclusion, and it means, A, that there's just not enough food. Food insecurity is widespread. It also means that child malnutrition, you know, kids who are wasting away, we've all seen the images over the last few weeks, that the rates of that are increasing rapidly. And it also means that people are dying. People are dying from malnutrition and malnutrition-related causes. And what we know is that a famine declaration, a famine classification is too late for far too many children. But now, this is a time for action. And the first piece of action should be to halt any plans for an escalation in military activity around Gaza City. This is where this famine is occurring. And many of these children, they are too small to walk. They are too weak to run, and they are too sick to flee. And so, any escalation is only going to see these children caught in the crossfire of this horrific conflict.
And when it gets to a famine point, you need special intervention in terms of how you can help to provide nutrition. It's not just any typical food that could be brought in through aid work. Are there specific medical needs or specific types of food products that are required at this level?
Yeah, for children who are severely acutely malnourished, it's basically a medical intervention, and it takes a number of weeks. And I've been in malnutrition clinics all around the world, and I've seen how it works. And you see children who are, at a stage often where they are barely able to move. They are too weak often to even be able to sort of suckle with their mother or cry. The silence often is absolutely harrowing. But over a course of days, you return and you see the colour come back to these children's cheeks. You see them come almost back to life. But it takes 6 weeks of this medical support. And that can't happen whilst there are bombs falling and fighting continuing. So we have to see a ceasefire. We have to see the hostages released. And organisations like UNICEF, Save the Children, the UN, we have to be allowed to do the work that we do all around the world. We do this in conflicts. We just have to be allowed to do it.
And we wish you well in that work, and thank you for bringing us your understanding and the descriptions of what's happening there. We need the information. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks so much, Kelly.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.